The White House is looking in every direction imaginable for ways to blunt the increasing dissatisfaction of inflation-racked Americans. Plus, Pat Cipollone has agreed to give sworn testimony to the House committee investigating the January 6th Capitol attack. The former White House counsel will be the highest-ranking aide in the Trump administration to agree to testify so far. And the man charged with killing 7 people at a Chicago area Independence Day parade admits to the deadly attack. More on the charges he faces. Plus, a Georgia district attorney issues a subpoena to a number of allies of former President Trump in what could be another significant legal case. The big question, will those subpoenaed actually comply? And later this hour, House Republicans want information about Hunter Biden from the sitting Treasury Secretary. We will explain why. But we begin with news that Pat Cipollone, the former White House counsel to then President Trump, has agreed to appear before the January 6th House Select Committee. He'll do so on Friday. The panel issued a subpoena to Cipollone last week after former White House aide Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony before that committee. Now, Cipollone has previously sat for an informal interview with the panel. Hutchinson testified that Cipollone once said that a trip to the Capitol on January 6th would present, quote, serious legal concerns. For more on this and today's top stories, we want to talk to Caitlin Huey-Burns and Tara Palmieri. They join me now. Caitlin is a CBS News political correspondent, and Tara is senior political correspondent for Puck News, and yes, I am a subscriber. Caitlin, Cipollone's interview will be videotaped and transcribed, but not live. What's the significance?
Well, Major, there's been a common refrain at the end of these January 6th hearings in which Liz Cheney essentially says, Pat Cipollone, we want to hear from you. We want you to testify. And now they are getting their wish, even though this is through subpoena and it will not be, live, as you mentioned. What they want to hear from him, they believe, of course, he is a key player in all of this, key to conversations with the former president, but also on record, essentially, at least through the telling of others who have come before the committee, of acknowledging that the president's behavior was potentially illegal. And this really stems from Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony last week when she mentioned these conversations that she was having with Pat Cipollone. Cipollone telling her, make sure that the former president doesn't go to the Capitol, because that would open up to a whole host of legal consequences. According to her telling, he said, he's going to get charged with every crime imaginable. So what the committee wants to hear from him, there are questions about executive privilege and how much he will be able to share. But using the testimony that we heard, for example, last week, those are the kinds of threads that this committee is trying to follow as they are trying to make the case that what Trump was doing was not legal.
Very good. Tara, there's a long question here, so bear with me. President Biden's approval numbers continue to depend on where you look to hover between the 30s and the 40s. Majorities of Americans fear, according to the polls, their economic future is getting worse, and huge majorities say the country is on the wrong track. Do Democrats you're talking to believe the White House grasps the depth of the president's current political problems?
It's a good question. They fear that he does not, and that he is likely to run regardless of his standing. Politically, they're worried that he might not have it in him to fight because they don't see him fighting on the issues day to day, like the fact that Roe v. Wade was overturned. They felt like he was a bit flat-footed on that. He hasn't seized the moment. They were expecting more from the latest shooting in Chicago. They were hoping that he would use this as a political moment. There's just a feeling of disappointment that he's not grabbing the mantle and turning these serious current events into political positions, especially since he is a president where Roe v. Wade was overturned on his watch. And I think there's a lot of concern that Biden may not run for re-election, that he will merely be the bridge to the next generation, which is what he said pretty much when he ran in 2020. But they're feeling anxious because if he is, they need to get their bench in order. And it seems like it's not very clear who that person will be, because many assume that Kamala Harris, the vice president, will likely be primaried.
So, Tara, you mentioned anxiety. Let's talk about another A word, ambition. Because if President Biden does not seek re-election, and you just said something that I hear from Democrats a lot, that Vice President Harris would not be necessarily the heir apparent. What about ambitious Democrats are you hearing as they think about this possible opening and what they may or may not do about it?
I mean, you're hearing a lot of the same names from 2020, like Elizabeth Warren, Amy Klobuchar, even Bernie Sanders, but Cory Booker. But you're also hearing some new names, some governors like Gavin Newsom in California, who's running ads in Florida right now for his own reelection in California. You're hearing J.B. Pritzker in Illinois, Mitch Landrieu in Louisiana, Whitmore. You're hearing a lot of different names in Michigan from around the country. And, also Phil Murphy in New Jersey. So you're hearing a whole slew of names sort of peek up their heads, talk to their donor circles, sort of indicate that they're ready. It just seems the thing that's clear. I just actually interviewed Congressman Ro Khanna recently about this, and he said that he expects there would be as many as 20 people in a primary field if President Biden doesn't run, that it is not, the nomination will not be handed to the vice president. And there's obviously concerns about if that weakens the field and if that makes it more difficult to run against President Trump in the event that all the Republicans decide that they will not primary him and he goes unchallenged.
Another name I hear is Jared Polis, governor of Colorado. Perhaps you hear that name also, Tara. Caitlin, Democrats, particularly progressive ones, cling to the hopes that some part of the president's long-abandoned economic and social spending plan, remember it was called Build Back Better, will emerge and be passed this summer or early fall. So is what Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer working on realistic?
Well, there are, some last hopes from Democrats before the midterm election for a couple of different reasons. I mean, one, they know that history is working against them. They know the environment is not good for them. So they're really kind of looking at the next 2 years, potentially in the minority in terms of control of Congress. So wanting to get as much as they can done before those midterm elections, and also to have things to run on in an environment where the economy isn't good for everybody. Gas prices are high, inflation is high, so they want to be able to kind of go back to their districts and their states and say, look, you voted for us last time around, and here's what we were able to deliver. Vote for us again and help us expand our numbers, and we can get even more. That's a really tough, thing to try to do in this kind of environment, especially given the slim numbers that they have already. There is this, reconciliation bill. I know we talk about it all the time. This is kind of a way for Democrats to maybe get some priorities in, and we know Chuck Schumer is working on that, but it would be kind of minimal in terms of these big, ambitious things that they've wanted to do. We may, see something like adjusting prescription drug prices, something along those lines. But Democrats that I've talked to on the Hill, say that it is very difficult still, and of course we're heading into a midterm environment where that complicates a whole host of things. And so you're going to really see, what the president did today, for example, by leaving the White House, going to Cleveland, talking about a pension program policy that they're putting in place to help get some money back in retirees' pockets. You kind of heard him make a campaign pitch really today, talking about a White House initiative, but it showed that they, need to be hammering home what they've been able to do, because you get the sense from, even Democratic voters that we've talked to out in the field, just kind of feel everything that Tara was just mentioning, kind of feel a little bit of that. You're asking us to vote, but to what end? And that remains a challenge for Democrats across the board.
So Tara, like me, you probably sift through a lot of polling data. So I want to ask you, if you draw any conclusions at all from polling data that shows, despite all the problems we just talked about with President Biden, the generic ballot preference for the midterms remains roughly competitive Republican to Democrat. Does that mean anything to you?
That is interesting. I think if we follow history, it's likely that Republicans will take back the House. There's a small chance they'll take back the Senate, but by a very slim majority, 1 or 2 seats. It's just sort of the way historically it's gone since, I think, 27 out of the 30 elections when there was a first-term president. During the midterm elections, the party in power was handed back to the opposing party. So if we're looking at history as an indicator, it would appear that way. Now, you add in the fact that we have really high gas prices, we have inflation issues, there's a lot of pocketbook issues. That doesn't help the president when trying to buck this trend. And then you just hear the angst from everyday voters who seem to be putting pocketbook issues ahead of really bigger existential issues in the party, like voting rights and Roe versus Wade and gun rights, just because they're thinking about, the thing that they're experiencing every day, which is filling up their gas tank or going to the grocery store. That's going to be really hard for Biden to try to fight those trends. And it's trickling down to just regular down ballot Democrats. And I think you're going to see that in come November that they suffer, but perhaps not as big of a wipeout as expected because of some of the fury over the overturning of Roe versus Wade and the concern about the direction that the Republicans are taking the party in.
Caitlin, what do we know about a phone call the president and vice president made to the wife of Brittany Griner, the WNBA star, who's been held in Russia since February?
That's right. And remember, over the weekend, there was reporting that she had sent a letter to Biden, from detention, essentially saying, do everything that you can do. And then her wife actually had an interview on CBS Mornings yesterday, pleading with the Biden administration, essentially, and saying that she hadn't heard from them. So this is something that we were pressing the White House press secretary yesterday on. And she had said at the time that Biden had read the letter and would be responding. Well, we found out today that he and the vice president did call Griner's wife, Sherelle, and they are trying to work through, according to them, diplomatic channels to help bring her home. Now, Jake Sullivan and the National Security Advisor and his team have been kind of running point on this, along with Secretary of State Antony Blinken. But it was interesting to hear the statement today from the president saying that he spoke to the wife, but also that he shared with her a draft letter that he is going to be sending to Griner herself. But there are all sorts of questions about what a release would look like. The White House has brought up Trevor Reed as an example. So, would this involve some kind of swap of sorts? And they've also invoked the names of other Americans detained in Russia and elsewhere. So suggesting that this may be part of a bigger picture here, not just focused on Griner, but a lot of questions about what this would actually look like and what conclusion it would come to, even though they say they're working on it.
Caitlin Huey-Burns and Tara Palmieri, we thank you. The suspected gunman in the deadly Chicago area parade shooting appears in court for the first time. His admission to prosecutors as we learn more about the victims of the 4th of July attack. Plus, a Georgia district attorney says she will not rule out issuing a subpoena to former President Trump after summoning a handful of his associates. Where the investigation into election interference stands and who else could testify. You are streaming Red and Blue.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
It's gonna be big!
The metaverse, the virtual world that's become a cryptocurrency casino.
It's like buying property on Mars.
Do they get an actual picture of this? No, it's a digital copy. Why would they pay for that?
Making millionaires almost overnight.
We made more than $1 million in crypto last year.
I have no idea how much money I have made over the past year. That's like, wow!
Big rewards.
There's gold in them, there are hills, as they say.
Bigger risks.
The market's down, but it's gonna bounce back. It's crypto.
Is it a gold rush or fool's gold?
It's our metaverse, our story. Peace out, y'all.
An original documentary from CBS Reports. Stream now.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now!
We got something crazy. And reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun. But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking,
Welcome to the idea of being a human being.
innovative, and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
threat of severe weather and dangerous tornadoes is expected to last.
Let's get the forecast from our partners at the Weather Channel.
Here we are in our virtual view.
Now 6 feet of water, imagine that. Cars that can act like battering rams.
These hyper-realistic simulations show you what the weather will look and feel like before it happens.
This is our virtual view, what it actually looks like.
Those are some of the best graphics I've seen.
Spare no expense, Gail.
We experience the weather in a whole new way.
I'm Nora O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News. What's your message to consumers?
They need help now.
Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
This week on 60 Minutes,
That's incredible.
The 60 Minutes.
60 minutes, 60 minutes.
Are you ready for some tough questions?
Let me ask you this.
you know how this sounds.
What's your response to that?
60 Minutes Sundays on CBS.
Authorities say the suspected gunman in the 4th of July Highland Park, Illinois shooting has confessed to his actions and indicated he had plans to wage a second attack. Chris Van Cleve has the latest.
The suspect in the Highland Park July 4th parade shooting showed no emotion during a virtual court appearance Wednesday. He's currently facing 7 counts of first-degree murder.
The judge found that the evidence was at such a level that he could be held without bond. Also, because the fact that it is a mandatory life sentence.
Investigators say while in custody, Robert Cremo III gave a voluntary statement admitting guilt in Monday's attack and revealed he considered another shooting when he briefly fled to Wisconsin.
He did see a celebration that was occurring in Madison, and he seriously contemplated using the firearm he had in his vehicle to commit another shooting.
Prosecutors told the court police found 83 shell casings and 3 magazines on the rooftop where prosecutors say the suspect launched the attack that killed 7 and wounded more than 30 others.
And everyone just started running for cover.
During the shooting, Gregory and Dana Ring rushed their children to a parking garage where they encountered a blood-covered toddler in the arms of a trembling Good Samaritan. They took the boy home with them.
He was happy. He was
fine.
He was fine.
He was playing with our smallest daughter. They're watching cartoons together.
The Rings later learned both of little Aiden's parents were killed in the attack. Among the many questions, how the suspect was able to legally purchase 5 firearms despite 2 encounters with police in 2019 involving threats of violence to himself or others. The 21-year-old is due back in court in late July, where he'll likely face a cascade of additional charges. Chris Van Cleve, CBS News, Highland Park, Illinois.
A curfew in Akron, Ohio has been lifted following protest over last week's deadly police shooting of a black man. 25-year-old Jayland Walker was shot more than 60 times after he allegedly fled a traffic stop. Walker was unarmed when he was shot, but police claim a shot was fired from his car before officers pursued him on foot. Body cam footage shows Walker wearing a ski mask. A gun was found in his vehicle. 8 officers have been placed on administrative leave pending the results of an investigation. A grand jury in Georgia has subpoenaed 7 allies of former President Trump in the investigation into his efforts to overturn that state's 2020 election result. South Carolina Republican Senator Lindsey Graham and Mr. Trump's former personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, have been among those subpoenaed. Graham said today he is planning on fighting the grand jury's order. Tia Mitchell joins me now. Tia is the Washington correspondent for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Tia, what do we know about these subpoenas and what their effect might actually be?
Well, we know that these subpoenas, the most recent ones, target members of former President Trump's inner circle. We're talking about, Rudy Giuliani, John Eastman, who was a very prominent attorney with Stop the Steal efforts, Senator Lindsey Graham, who we know is, one of Trump's biggest allies within Congress. And what it means is that the grand jury is really looking at Trump's inner circle, the top level of government at the time. Of course, we don't know is exactly who is under investigation. There's been a lot of speculation about whether subpoenas mean, for example, that Rudy Giuliani may not necessarily be the target of the investigation. We don't know that. And we also don't know if President Trump is a target of the investigation. But it's clear that the investigation is looking at, again, President Trump and those at the highest level of government, those in the Oval Office with him during the efforts to overturn the general election leading up to January 6th.
And this really is an investigation into whether state law was violated in any of those efforts. It's being led by the Fulton County District Attorney, Fani Willis. We should note she is a Democrat. One big question looming out there, will she subpoena former President Trump?
Yeah, and again, that's one of those things we don't know. We probably won't know until she actually does it or right before. And again, there's so much speculation about what these subpoenas mean. And if Trump is the target of the investigation, which again, we don't know, would the grand jury subpoena him or would they stop and just subpoena people around him? There's so much we don't know. There's a lot of speculation that because of the way the state laws are written, that because one of the charges that are possible in this case is not just actively engaging in election fraud, but a conspiracy charge that many people believe could end up in former President Trump facing charges. And you would think that if they do want to charge President Trump, they might attempt to hear from him in some matter, whether it's via subpoena or otherwise compelling him to testify or getting him to sit down. But we just don't yet know what that might mean, when it could happen, or when those decisions will be made.
Tia, about the subpoena for Senator Graham, his attorneys responded with a statement claiming this was, quote, all politics, unquote. Is there a reason that we've been able to discern as to why the district attorney wants to talk to Senator Graham?
Well, in the documents where the subpoena was drafted, it mentions a couple of calls that the senator placed after the 2020 general election. He called Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, asked Raffensperger to take another look at absentee ballots that allies of President Trump felt had either been inaccurately counted or ballots that should have been thrown out were instead counted and helped Joe Biden carry Georgia. Now, we know a lot of those allegations that Senator Graham and others were peddling were based on false or just false, misleading information, untruths about the election and how the election was carried out and how ballots were counted. But he was among the people trying to pressure Secretary of State Raffensperger to take another look. And those calls he placed are the main reason why he has now been subpoenaed.
And Tia, you've been very careful to talk about things being speculated but not yet known. As you know, this investigation has been going on for quite some time. It's been simmering. So for the audience who wants to know what these subpoenas represent, not exactly what they're about or where they're taking this, it seems to an outside observer like myself, the very fact these subpoenas have been granted and backed up suggests this is a step forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the grand jury and DA Willis, I would say, are not taking this lightly. They know that the eyes of the nation are on this investigation. She's trying to do everything by the book because she's made it clear that she's serious about holding people accountable if the grand jury determines that laws were broken after the 2020 general election. We know about the intense pressure on elected officials in Georgia. And we should note that those elected officials were Republicans just like President Trump, who resisted that pressure and who said, you know, claims that the election were stolen, that's false. That did not happen. Claims about ballots not being counted correctly or absentee ballots being mishandled, those things are false. And President Trump and his allies persisted anyway. And DA Willis, who's in Fulton County, which is the most populous county in Georgia. It's the home of Atlanta. It's where a lot of the allegations were targeted. She says if she finds that there was criminal liability, she will bring charges.
Tia Mitchell with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. We thank you. The Biden administration is urging a panel of federal judges to preserve an Obama-era policy that protects undocumented immigrants who arrived in the United States as children. The three-judge panel heard arguments Wednesday in a lawsuit filed by Texas and 8 other Republican-led states. States. Attorneys claim the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, otherwise known as DACA, places an unfair burden on states and amounts to executive overreach. Lawyers for the Justice Department say the state of Texas lacks standing to sue the federal government. They also argue that immigration officials have broad discretion to protect immigrants who do not pose a threat. The court's ruling on DACA stands to impact more than 600,000 people currently enrolled in the program. It is the issue on the minds of a majority of Americans, according to several recent polls. You guessed it, it's the economy. So what's behind some of the recent price spikes at the pump and in the grocery store? And how long can we expect it to continue? You are streaming CBS News.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
It's gonna be big!
The metaverse, the virtual world that's become a cryptocurrency casino.
It's like buying property on Mars.
Do they get an actual picture of this? No, it's a digital copy. Why would they pay for that?
Making millionaires almost overnight.
We made more than $1 million in crypto last year.
I have no idea how much money I have made over the past year. That's like, wow!
Big rewards.
There's gold in them, there hills, as they say.
Bigger risks.
The market's down, but it's gonna bounce back. It's crypto.
Is it a gold rush or fool's gold?
It's our metaverse, our story. Peace out, y'all.
An original documentary from CBS Reports. Stream now.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now.
We got something crazy.
And reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun. But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking,
Welcome to the idea of being a human being.
innovative, and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
The threat of severe weather and dangerous tornadoes is expected to last.
Let's get the forecast from our partners at the Weather Channel.
Here we are in our virtual view.
Now 6 feet of water, imagine that. Cars that can act like battering rams.
These hyper-realistic simulations show you what the weather will look and feel like before it happens.
This is our virtual view, what it actually looks like.
Those are some of the best graphics I've seen.
Spare no expense, Gail.
We experience the weather in a whole new way.
I'm Norah O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News. What's your message to consumers?
They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
This week on 60 Minutes.
That's incredible.
The 60 Minutes.
60 minutes, 60 minutes.
Are you ready for some tough questions?
Let me ask you this.
You know how this sounds.
What's your response to that?
60 Minutes Sundays on CBS.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now.
We got something crazy.
And reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun. But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking,
Welcome to the idea of being a human being.
innovative, and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
Welcome back to Red and Blue. Here's a look at some of our top stories. Pat Cipollone has agreed to appear before the January 6th House Select Committee. The former White House counsel for Donald Trump is expected to speak with the panel in private on Friday. Plus, the president and vice president have both recently spoken with the wife of WNBA star Brittany Griner, who remains detained in Russia. White House officials say President Biden reassured Sherelle Griner that he is working to secure Brittany's release as soon as possible. And a new Labor Department report reveals U.S. job openings remain near historic highs. Roughly 11.3 million jobs are currently available. Officials estimate that 4.3 million Americans quit jobs in May, many of them seeking even better jobs. Now, natural gas prices haven't risen much in recent months here in the United States, but they have skyrocketed more than, get this, 700% in Europe since the start of last year. Now, many nations around the world have been trying to transition to natural gas as part of their way to pursue cleaner energy. And that's something the Biden administration has also been pushing in its effort to combat climate change. With this spike in natural gas prices, Europe now appears on the brink of a recession. For more on this and the economic outlook here on the home front, Colby Smith joins me now. Colby is the U.S. editor with the Financial Times. Colby, so break it down for us. How does Europe's, it can only be described as astronomical spike in natural gas prices stand to impact American consumers, if at all?
So it's an immediate and urgent problem in Europe, to say the least. But in the U.S., it's actually quite a more limited impact here. And that's really because of what's been driving this spike in natural gas prices in Europe. So we recently had some new developments out of Texas where one of the facilities there was taken offline, and it's expected to be offline for longer than expected. Now, in the U.S., that led to a drop in natural gas prices, whereas in Europe, it's really helped to kind of bid things up more substantially. So, in fact, it is a quite more limited impact than one would expect. But that being said, it does contribute a lot to global inflationary pressures. And given the magnitude of the inflation situation in the U.S., anything that is bidding up price pressures is an unwelcome development.
So let's talk about gasoline prices here in the United States. They have dropped on average about 25%, or no, not 25%, 25 cents per gallon in recent weeks. The average for regular is about $4.78 today. That's according to AAA. So, big question, hard to answer. Is that downward trend likely to continue?
So that is quite a tough question. I think any economist these days would be quite hesitant to call any kind of peak in gas prices. But what we are seeing is certainly a positive development on this front, especially after gas prices on average reach this pretty, alarming above $5 level on average across the country. And we know that many, states and cities across the nation were experiencing things that were much more significant than that. That being said, the expectation is that we might see continued declines in gas prices, just given the fact that we've seen energy prices more broadly, especially this week in particular, drop quite significantly. So that is likely to feed through to a certain extent. But, I don't want to kind of go out on a limb and say that, we're done with high gas prices here, just given the extent to which those prices are determined by external factors such as the war in Ukraine and other potential developments. There's really the susceptibility to external shocks that we haven't seen in quite some time.
So speaking of external shocks, let's talk about inflation. It currently stands at 8.6%. The Fed meaning the Federal Reserve, wants to combat inflation by raising interest rates. But I've read, and other economists have said, there's only so much the Fed can do, and if it goes overboard, meaning overreacts, that could hasten a recession. What are you seeing? What are you hearing?
Absolutely. That's very much the risk that we're hearing, not only on the Hill, but in economists across Wall Street, and here in D.C. in particular. So the concern is that, there's only so much that the Fed can do in terms of taming some of these inflationary pressures, given they're in large part driven by supply-related issues, whether it's tied to the war in Ukraine or COVID lockdowns in China that have further gummed up supply chains. So, but where the Fed can be effective, and I think this is the point that Chair Powell, who chairs the central bank, is trying to emphasize here, is that there are things that the Fed can do on the demand side of the equation. And we've seen consumers out there spending quite significantly on goods and increasingly more on services. And the hope is that by the Fed raising interest rates, it helps to dampen some of that demand and in turn allows supply to more easily catch up to those levels, and we see some kind of equilibrium. But it's not going to be an easy task, to say the least, and it really does seem like recession risks are rising.
To that point, recession risks rising. Bloomberg has put the odds of a recession between now and the next 6 months at 35%. Now, the White House routinely insists a recession is not inevitable. That's the quote, not inevitable. But there are rumblings in certain economic circles that the recessionary train has already left the station, meaning I've read some people saying, well, it's not statistically one yet, but we're in that kind of climate. What are you hearing?
Absolutely. That's definitely the direction of travel. I think people believe that we're heading in to a certain extent. And you're already seeing some softening in economic activity on the margins. If you look at the housing sector in particular, prices have declined quite significantly just in recent weeks as mortgage rates have increased. And at the same time, you're seeing consumer sentiment and confidence more broadly really sour as people anticipate a period of slower economic growth. So the big concern here is that, the Fed historically has never really been able to tame inflation without causing a widespread economic contraction. And that's simply because its monetary policy tools are quite blunt. They can't specifically target the sectors, let's say, that are seeing pretty significant price pressures. They just enact one sweeping interest rate increase, and that has, widespread effects on the economy at large. So the real concern is what happens on the labor market here, which is coming from a period of quite significant strength, with job openings, as today's data show, still quite elevated. But given the extent to which inflation is above the Fed's 2% target and how much they will need to do in order to bring it down, I think expectations are that unemployment is going to rise, quite significantly from these levels.
Colby Smith with Financial Times, we thank you.
Thank you.
President Biden traveled to Ohio today to tout a financial assistance program aimed at protecting retirement benefits for millions of Americans. The administration says the plan will avert pension cuts for retirees over the next 3 decades. And Skylar Henry has more from the White House.
At a Cleveland, Ohio high school, President Biden promoted a plan to protect multi-employer pensions, which cover union employees who work at multiple companies.
With today's actions, millions of workers will have the dignified retirement they earned and they deserve.
Under the American Rescue Plan, the pension plans can apply for billions of dollars in financial assistance. The administration says the program will restore benefits to thousands of workers and avert pension cuts for millions of retirees over the next 3 decades. The president's trip was also an opportunity for him to share his economic message with blue-collar voters in a state he lost in 2020.
We made incredible progress on the economy from where we were a year and a half ago. We got a long way to go because of inflation. Now I'm fighting like hell to lower costs on things that you talk about around your kitchen table.
The Democrats are hoping to gain a U.S. Senate seat in Ohio, with incumbent Republican Senator Rob Portman not running for re-election this year.
There's a real choice in the Senate race.
The opportunities in this state depend on us fighting and winning.
Recent CBS News polls show growing pessimism among Americans over the economy. Skylar Henry, CBS News, the White House.
The Supreme Court's decision overturning Roe v. Wade has generated political and legal battles across the country. How states are rushing to respond and how those rulings stand to shape abortion rights in the months ahead. You are streaming Red and Blue.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now.
We got something crazy.
And reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Time. Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun. But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking.
Welcome to the idea of being a human being.
Innovative and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
It's gonna be big!
The metaverse, the virtual world that's become a cryptocurrency casino.
It's like buying property on Mars.
Do they get an actual picture of this? No, it's a digital copy. Why would they pay for that?
Making millionaires almost overnight.
We made more than $1 million in crypto last year.
I have no idea how much money I have made over the past year. That's like, wow!
Big rewards.
There's gold in them, there are hills, as they say.
Bigger risks.
The market's down, but it's going to bounce back. It's crypto.
Is it a gold rush or fool's gold?
It's our metaverse, our story. Peace out, y'all.
An original documentary from CBS Reports. Stream now.
This week on 60 Minutes. That's incredible.
The 60 Minutes.
60 Minutes, 60 Minutes.
Are you ready for some tough questions?
Let me ask you this.
You know how this sounds.
What's your response to that?
60 Minutes Sundays on CBS.
A group of Pennsylvania Republicans are throwing their support across the aisle to back the state's Democratic gubernatorial candidate. A number of current and former Republican officials in Pennsylvania are choosing to back State Attorney General Josh Shapiro over their party's own nominee, State Senator Doug Mastriano. In a statement, former House Speaker of the state of Pennsylvania, Denny O'Brien, said Mastriano, quote, continues to divide us and waste time and taxpayer money on his conspiracy theories and plans to upend Pennsylvania's election. Mastriano campaigned and won the Republican primary on unfounded claims of voter fraud in the 2020 election. The Justice Department is suing Arizona to block a new law that would require residents to provide proof of citizenship to vote in presidential elections or by mail. The law was signed by Republican Governor Doug Ducey in March and is set to take effect in January of 2023. Justice Department officials say the law is in direct violation of the National Voter Registration Act. The department also says the legislation violates the Civil Rights Act of 1964 because it mandates that election officials reject voter registration forms with minor errors. It has been nearly 2 weeks since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, and state abortion laws are in what can only be described as constant flux. A new Politico report highlights how these laws are changing in some states on a near daily basis. So far, courts have blocked abortion bans from taking effect in 8 states. Megan Messerly joins us now. She's a healthcare reporter at Politico. So, Megan, in your Politico piece out today, you report that legality of abortion has flipped around in some states after the Supreme Court's ruling. How is that happening? What are the impacts on the ground?
Yeah, thanks, Major. Just like you mentioned, these laws have sometimes been changing on a day-by-day, in some states an hour-by-hour basis. And this all has to do with how these abortion laws are playing out in the courts. In some states, there are enjoined abortion bans that predate the Dobbs decision. We've seen Republican attorneys general go to court to ask those bans to be lifted. In other states, we've seen trigger bans take effect, barring access to the procedure. Then we've seen abortion rights proponents go to state courts to then have those injunctions or have those laws blocked, as they have been in some instances. And based on the court action, we've seen this change rapidly. Just for instance, yesterday in Florida, the state's 15-week abortion ban went into effect on July 1st. Yesterday morning, on Tuesday, a judge briefly enjoined the law before there was an appeal, and that appeal immediately triggered a stay, putting that 15-week ban into effect. So there were a couple hours where that law was not into effect, and then it went back into effect. And so we've just seen this change rapidly across the nation since the Dobbs decision came down on June 24th.
And Megan, this must throw those who provide this care and the patients who seek it into almost a constant state of uncertainty and unknowing about what is legal, what isn't, what can be provided and what can't. That must create not only chaos, but confusion.
That's right, Major. You know, talking to abortion providers in some of these states, you know, the laws may be changing day by day, hour by hour, but that's really hard for clinics when they're trying to figure out when to schedule procedures. And so in some states, you know, that means that some clinics may have just shut their operations entirely in light of the uncertainty. In some states, I'm thinking about Utah and Louisiana, abortion clinics halted operations when those states' trigger bans went into effect. When the courts then blocked the enforcement of those bans, they started resuming abortion procedures again. But you're right. It makes it incredibly difficult for people to plan their own abortions. If they're seeking abortions, it makes it difficult for doctors to figure out their schedules. It basically throws this entire system of care into a state of uncertainty.
So those who are trying to protect and defend abortion rights, they're filing lots of petitions. Is that a long-term strategy, or is that basically something to delay the inevitable as long as possible? Because if I read the Supreme Court ruling clearly, meaning they were pretty clear, and I tried to read it as such, this is a state matter, and if state legislatures have made a decision, eventually that's going to be imposed. At least that's how I see it. What are you hearing?
Yeah, so I think to some extent that's true, especially in some of these deep red states where you have a very conservative state Supreme Court. Any requests for the courts, lower courts, to block these laws may just be a temporary stopgap measure. But, I think it's worth noting that even though state legislatures, will have the say, many of them have already put in place laws, again, trigger laws or laws that were enjoined that are now taking effect, and more may pass laws in the coming weeks and months and years. I think it's also worth noting that a lot of those laws are going to end up in the state Supreme Courts, and the state Supreme Courts will have the final say, in lieu of Congress passing some sort of federal abortion law. It's going to be state Supreme Courts who have the final say in looking at those laws that legislatures pass and say, does this law align with our state's constitution? And those state Supreme Courts are going to have the opportunity to either say, yes, abortion is protected under the state's constitution, or no, there is no constitutional right to abortion to be found here in this state.
And Megan, I think it's worth pointing out that in some states, this is not a current debate. Some states have made it clear that they support abortion rights and are going to maintain that access even after the Supreme Court's decision. True?
That's correct. Yeah. So we've seen in about, half the country, it's expected that, at least for now, abortion will remain legal. In some of those states, legislatures have explicitly passed laws to say, we believe that abortion should be allowed through viability up to 24 weeks. Some say we protect the right to abortion throughout pregnancy. Some state Supreme Courts have already ruled that there's a constitutional right to abortion. And then now we're seeing ballot measures as well, attempting to codify the right to abortion in state constitutions.
And real quickly, Megan, in the midterm elections, one of the messages from Democrats will be if Republicans take over, there might be a federal change to what is allowed in all states, correct?
Yep, that is the big conversation. It is in the hands of states absent federal action on this issue. And so I think the big question that a lot of advocates and lawmakers at the state level are looking at is, okay, hey, we can pass what we want for now, but what action is Congress going to take? And that ultimately will set the rules for the entire country. But in the meantime, it's in the hands of the states.
Influencing the conversation for 2022 and 2024. Megan Messerly of Politico, thank you very much.
Thanks, Major.
Ukrainian officials are encouraging residents in the Donetsk region to evacuate as Russian forces inch closer to the eastern territories. Russia claimed control of the neighboring Luhansk region earlier this week after capturing the key city of Lysychansk. The offensive comes as all 30 NATO countries pave the way for Sweden and Finland to join the alliance. Accession protocols for the Nordic countries are now being reviewed by each nation's legislature for final approval. If Sweden and Finland do join, it will expand NATO's border with Russia and mark the most significant addition to the alliance since the 1990s. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson is rejecting calls to resign after two of his top ministers stepped down. Those ministers are leaving after a series of scandals involving the Prime Minister himself. Johnson is currently under fire for appointing lawmaker Christopher Pincher to his government, despite knowing that Pincher faced 2019 allegations of sexual misconduct. Johnson spoke about remaining in office during a discussion with Parliament earlier Wednesday.
I look at the issues that this country faces. I look at the pressures that people are under and the need for government to focus on their priorities, which is what we are doing. I look at the biggest war in Europe for 80 years, and I cannot for the life of me see how it is responsible just to walk away from that.
Johnson narrowly survived a no-confidence vote in Parliament a month ago. We are going to take a quick break, which means you have a couple of minutes to download the free CBS News app on all your devices. You can catch live local coverage from across the country from all of our CBS stations. And while you're at it, check out Paramount Plus, where we have a mountain, yes, a mountain of content for you to stream there as well, including your favorite shows, movies, and sports.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now.
We got something crazy.
And reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun.
But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking,
Welcome to the idea of being a human being.
innovative, and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
It's gonna be big.
The metaverse, the virtual world that's become a cryptocurrency casino.
It's like buying property on Mars.
Do they get an actual picture of this? No, it's a digital copy. Why would they pay for that?
Making millionaires almost overnight.
We made more than $1 million in crypto last year.
I have no idea how much money I have made over the past year. That's like, wow.
Big rewards.
There's gold in them there hills, as they say.
Bigger risks.
The market's down, but it's going to bounce back. It's crypto.
Is it a gold rush or fool's gold?
It's our metaverse, our story. Peace out, y'all.
An original documentary from CBS Reports. Stream now.
This week on 60 Minutes.
That's incredible.
The 60 Minutes.
60 minutes, 60 minutes.
Are you ready for some tough questions?
Let me ask you this.
You know how this sounds.
What's your response to that?
60 Minutes Sundays on CBS.
CBS News has obtained a letter from House Republicans demanding that Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen share information about Hunter Biden's alleged suspicious foreign business dealings. The letter also accuses the Biden administration of stonewalling this Republican-led inquiry. CBS News senior investigative correspondent Catherine Herridge is here now. Catherine, break down this letter for us. What's in it? What's it about?
Well, Major, this letter at its core is about more than 150 suspicious activity reports that were first reported by CBS News involving the global affairs for Hunter Biden, James Biden, the president's brother, as well as their business associates. Suspicious activity reports, they're also known as SARs, are flagged by banks when a number of factors are met. One is the amount of money involved. Second is the speed of the transaction. So, for example, how quickly the money enters an account and then is transferred out or cashed out of the account. And then finally, something called layering. How many accounts does the money pass through before it reaches its final destination? That can be an indicator of possible money laundering. We don't know what the finding was of the U.S. banks with these 150-plus transactions involving the Biden family finances, but they certainly were flagged for further review, and these are the records that House Republicans would like to obtain.
And Catherine, as I understand it, there was some change during the Biden administration as to what Congress could or couldn't access where these kinds of suspicious activity reports are concerned. Do I have that right?
Well, that's right. The Republican who's really at the heart of this effort is Republican Congressman James Comer. He has now written to the Treasury Department saying that there was a phone call in June of this year where Treasury officials told Republican staff members that they would not provide these suspicious activity reports unless there was a request or the backing of Democrats as well. You're right. What Comer is saying, and the Treasury Department has not disputed, is that access to these suspicious activity reports are not happening with sort of paperwork being handed over to Congress. They do what's called an in-camera review, which means that you go to a reading room and you can look at the records. And there may even be additional restrictions there as to whether you can take in, computers, papers, notepads in order to take down information. So at the heart of this is the allegation that access to these financial records is being blocked. And the allegation is the Treasury Department is running some kind of political interference in this case.
So what is Treasury's response to that pretty freighted accusation from House Republicans?
Well, the Treasury Department did not respond directly to CBS News' questions, but they did provide us with a lengthy response that reads in part, Treasury provides SARs to Congress in a manner that enables robust oversight and that is consistent with how other sensitive law enforcement information is often produced. It is not a political process. It continues, since the beginning of this administration, Treasury has made SARs available in response to authorized committee requests and continues to engage on the process with any individual members seeking information. And you've been in Washington a long time, Major. The key word there is authorized, because the House Oversight Committee is controlled by Democrats, and they're the ones really with all the power to request the records.
Understood. The White House found itself responding to new reporting about alleged evidence recovered on Hunter Biden's laptop. Let's take a listen.
From this podium, I am not going to talk about alleged materials from the laptop.
So
I will.
Are you disputing the president's voice on the voicemail?
I am not going to talk about alleged materials on the laptop.
Are
it's
you
not
disputing
happening.
Then that it is not?
Peter, I refer you to his son's representative.
So, Catherine, what is the status of that part of the Hunter Biden story and investigation?
Well, Major, based on our reporting here at CBS News, this is a very serious criminal probe that's been unfolding by the U.S. Attorney in Delaware. We understand that they've been looking at tax fraud, tax evasion, money laundering, and possible violations of foreign lobbying laws. What I can tell you from our reporting in the last few weeks is that there's been what I would describe as a lot of static or noise in the system. Based on my experience, that can be an indicator that the two sides are talking about things like what ultimately charges may or may not look like, or whether some kind of plea agreement is possible. I also want to emphasize that they're looking at records that go back to 2014. We've reviewed subpoenas that show they've requested banking records back to that period. And the reason all of that matters is because at that point, Joe Biden was then the vice president. Major.
Senior investigative correspondent Catherine Herridge, as always, we thank you.
You're welcome.
A new Labor Department report reveals U.S. employers are struggling to fill a near-record amount of job openings. Dan Lieberman has more from New York.
These are all of our frozen items.
Amanda Wynn is co-founder of the startup food delivery service Pastel, and finding workers has been a struggle.
Last year, we posted a job opening, and we got 0 people.
But that changed when she recently posted new positions.
People are starting to actually write in about job openings.
A new report from the Labor Department shows there are 11.3 million job openings, down slightly from the previous month, but still near record levels.
What does the slight drop in job openings tell us about the job market right now?
It is true that job openings fell on this latest snapshot, but the key is that the job market remains remarkably stable.
Mark Hamrick is the senior economic analyst at Bankrate.com. The new data shows demand for professional workers dropped a little, but many other industries continue to ramp up hiring.
More than 11 million job openings in this country. As of last count, there were only 6 million officially unemployed.
The report also shows a near record 4.3 million people quit their jobs in May, with many leaving their job for a better one.
People tend to quit jobs when they have a high degree of confidence about their ability to get a job.
That confidence comes even as the stock market shows signs of uncertainty and as interest rates continue to climb. Many economists are predicting a looming recession, but those fears don't seem to be having a major impact on the job market for now. Dan Lieberman, CBS News, New York.
That does it for today. You can stream Red and Blue Monday to Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern. And a reminder, if you want to watch previous episodes of the program, you can see them anytime on the CBS News website. Just head to cbsnews.com/red and blue.
I'm Norah O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation.